Hi, everyone, and welcome to How the Wise One Grows. Before we get started, let's just take a moment to land here together with 3 deep breaths. So just find a space where you can be still if that's available, or if not, just notice where your body touches the earth or the ground beneath you. And take a big breath in, fill your chest, fill your belly with air. Exhale, open your mouth, let it out. Again, inhale, fill your chest, fill your belly with air. Exhale, open your mouth, let it go. One more big inhale and exhale. And then return to that sensation of your body as it connects to the earth beneath you. And you can slowly open your eyes as you return to this space. I am so excited for today's conversation. One, because it's getting to reconnect with someone who our souls like cross paths really briefly years and years ago in a shamanism. I think it was Edith's shamanism class. And I've just loved seeing the work she's been doing in the world. So today we're here with Heather. And Heather and I know each other from both went to UVA, and Edith Turner was this amazing anthropologist, and just like I swear she was just the most magical soul. Had a class on at Thursday evenings. It was in her house. It was cozy. I remember she always had like tea and ginger cookies. And she was just it was incredible. We talked about so many spiritual things. I so deeply wish I could be back in that class now. But I'm so excited to see you again. Thanks for being here, Heather.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And it's so beautiful to start our chat with Edie in the room with us
Yeah.
because she was just such a guiding force, I'm sure, for both of us on our spiritual path. And just love her so much. That was such a special time to be with her and in her presence before she transitioned over.
It really was. Well,
Yeah.
how have you been? What have you been doing in the world? I know tidbits. Heather has I know that you're a clinical herbalist. You're doing really wonderful work. I love your Instagram, and Heather has this amazing Substack, which is what drew me to her in today's conversation, which we'll get into. But do you mind just kind of sharing with
hmm
listeners a bit about what you're doing in the world right now?
Yes. So, yeah, as Holly said, I'm a certified clinical herbalist and nutritionist. And I've been practicing now for almost 10 years as an herbalist. And it's really, you know, it's really inspired me to connect deeper with the natural world. That was really my biggest inspiration with going on that path. I've partnered that with the writing that I've done throughout the years. And that's really what's coming through a lot with my Substack now. Holistic education and really wellness based education is what I'm focused on. So, really have a handle in a lot of different things in the natural world, but essentially just helping to guide people back to their human body, back to feeling good
Mhm.
in their bodies and connected and aligned with their purpose. And yeah, doing so through the natural world.
I think that you might not remember this, but I remember one time in college, like, going to your apartment, and you had this, like, beautiful tea blend, like, on the stove. I had just, like, never seen, like, true tea blend in that way, like, with all the herbs in the
Mhm.
pot, and you were really one of the first people that kind of introduced me to that world of herbalism, and really
Oh, I
sparked a
love that.
curiosity there. Yeah. So, I
Yeah.
love what you've been doing.
Thank you. Yeah, and yeah, the herbs have been such a big inspiration for me for many years now. I love, like, thinking back to those big herbal brews I would make back in
Mhm.
Charlottesville, and, yeah, they're always going herbalism will always be a strong pillar for me, and through my work with the plants has really led me to become more inspired with how plants guide us deeper into the other realms. So, how they're actually guiding
Mhm.
us deeper into our psycho-emotional and psycho-spiritual levels. So I was sparked to learn more about herbalism initially through physically what it's doing in the body, and then more recently or throughout the past couple years, how do we actually connect that through other layers? So really that's what inspired me to launch my Substack more recently
Mhm.
is the weaving of all of those together, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I hope that we can
Yeah.
weave that in to our conversation today.
Yeah.
Um, Today what most sparked me, there's so many things I feel like I could talk to you
Yeah.
about, but you had put out this article about attuning versus subsuming. And it
Mhm.
reminded me of one time I was having a conversation with my therapist, and she was something I am always probably going to be working on is the way she phrased it was holding your gravity when you're
Mm.
with someone. So, like, she had us sitting across from each other in a room, and it was like, so when I'm in a conversation, I very physically do this. I lean in to the
Mm.
person I'm listening to. Like, I am leaning and I'm fully immersed in that person. And she was
Mm.
like, that's great that you're listening. But if that person wobbles or falls, like, and you're leaning into them, you would fall too, right? So how can you practice like being with someone in a room and holding your gravity? You're still in that room, you're still listening, you're still soaking it in. But if they fall, you're not going to fall too.
Mhm.
Um, and I was curious if how that, I guess if we can backtrack to this concept of attuning versus subsuming, that's what sparked my interest. But
Mhm.
what could you explain from your perspective what it means to attune and what it means to subsume?
Yes, I love that you're bringing in the vision and, what your therapist shared with you about that sense of gravity because you really just hit the nail on the head. That is the essence and the difference between when you're attuning to someone or attuning to a situation and when you're subsuming to it. When you're subsuming, that's when you're leaning in, and not just leaning in, like, an empathetic, compassionate way, like, you wanna lean
Mhm.
into to attune with somebody because you can do that as well, but that's when you're, like, leaning on somebody else, so to speak, like, you're like, "How can
Mm.
I get as close to you as possible? How can I or as immersed in this experience or the situation?" Doesn't have to be with a person, it could be with a job opportunity, it could be with a living situation or, really anything in life. And attunement is more when we're allowing ourselves to experience harmony with whatever that situation, that person, that relationship is. And that is that is the secret sauce of, like, maintaining your gravity, that's when you're
Yeah.
able to, like, hold your presence and actually be and harmonize, like, just like if you were playing an instrument, you're harmonizing with
Mhm.
that person, you're harmonizing with the world around you, versus when you're subsuming, you're like, "How do I dissolve into the situation?" Like, you're so enamored by something or, you just want to really connect with that person or you really want that opportunity or there's so much chaos around you in your environment, so you just let your sense of self completely dissolve in the other. You let it
Mhm.
absorb into you, however you visualize that. And yeah, that's the essence of it. So it sounds like you're already meditating on it, which is amazing.
I really love the way you explain that with, like, the music element too. Like, rather than, like, just trying to play what someone's playing exactly and almost
Mhm.
like you can bring out more fullness and create something more powerful and potent when you're like, "Oh, like, here's where this can go in here, like, these are 2 different things, but they compare to enhance this song,
Mhm.
this moment to another layer."
Yes.
Um, so I'm definitely someone who, like, my go-to is to subsume,
Mm.
and I feel like it's led to burnout with a lot of things and even like people and relationships that I like really love. And to me, I
Mhm.
can see ways in which in my life subsuming has led to like resentment building up. Resentment and burnout are probably the two things that come
Mm.
most to my mind. How can people like me, I hope they're out there, how can people work on if your inclination is to subsume? How can we start to take a step back, hold our gravity, and focus on that attunement?
Yeah, this is a really, really good talking point, and also just know that you're not alone. This is something that I have
Mhm,
a tendency for that I feel like most people, especially I'm sure a lot of folks listening out there, have a proclivity for that, have a proclivity to subsume because
mhm,
a lot of people that are attuned to subtle energy or they're attuned to the natural world around them, it's really easy to want to dissolve your sense of self into that, especially if it's something that you
mhm,
like or if it's something that you want to bring into your life. Maybe it's a person you admire or, a lifestyle that you really want to take on or a culture that you're really into. We tend to just like, how do we like let it, come into ourselves? But in subsuming, you're actually abandoning a part of yourself in doing that. And if
mm,
a part of yourself, if not all of yourself, and that's often where the burnout comes in. Yeah, that's often where
mm,
the resentment comes in that you're talking about because all of a sudden it's like you devoted all your energy on subsuming into that thing or that relationship and then you're resentful because, you have lost touch with yourself, and you've
mhm,
lost touch with your authentic source and your natural authentic presence and your identity in the other being an environment, a person, a situation, etcetera. So, in order to not subsume, this is the same that goes back to the old adage, energy goes where attention flows or vice versa. And
mhm,
really, the more you focus your energy on attunement and the practices of attunement, the less you'll subsume, the more you'll build that new neural pathway into favoring attunement in those situations, into being like, oh, this is like a person I'm really curious about, or this is a situation I'm really magnetized by and then, naturally you'll gravitate away from subsuming and like, let me absorb it and just become that thing and into attuning instead, where you're like, oh, like I hold my own uniqueness and my own identity and my own authenticity. And here's this new instrument or here's this new sound, this new thing that I want to harmonize with and I want to play with. And you have your own little metaphorical jam session where you're
mhm,
just able to, reverb off each other and you're able to really sink in and harmonize. That is, that is how we shift away from subsuming automatically, if that's our tendency, into attunement.
mhm. Do you have any practices or like examples of ways people can work with that in their day-to-day life?
Yes. So I know we're talking about, we're breaking down all of the details, so it might sound more technical than it actually is, but it's
Yeah.
really, really simple in practice. And anybody listening to this can actually start to do it even right now in this moment. And if not, when you're in the grocery store this evening, when you're going for a walk, you can start to implement it at any moment in your daily life. And I do that by pausing. And this is something I've developed an entire online course about the art of the sacred pause. It's what I decided to name my Substack. This is something I'm really passionate about. And effectively learning how to take intentional pauses throughout the day can completely transform the way you not only experience your life, but also allowing you to attune in those moments, to step back and recognize how you can attune or maybe even instantaneously bring you into a place of attunement, depending on, where you're at in that moment. So, really through pausing, all you have to do, and we can even do it right now in
I
session.
would love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just like how you introduced us in the beginning of the session. It's to soften your gaze or close your eyes. And maybe usually I like to put one hand on my heart or to make contact with the body in some way. Make contact with your own body. Ground yourself back into home, into yourself, and just notice. You don't have to take any deliberate breath work. You don't have to do any particular visualization. You just sit, you intentionally pause, and you just notice what is there. You notice what you're feeling. You tune into yourself. You've got this hand making contact with your body. You're noticing and you're reconnecting with your inner world. And from that place, you can call to mind the thing that you're trying to attune to, or the person you're trying to attune to, the environment, if that's your goal. If you're sitting here and you're wanting to attune to something, you call to mind what that thing is, and then you notice. You notice what comes up for you when you call that to mind. Maybe you notice how your breath is changing in that moment. You notice if there's any physical changes that are occurring. You slow down and you pause and you observe what the vibration of that person, that situation, that environment is feeling like in your body with your own internal vibration. And you observe and you notice it, and then you ask yourself after you sit with it for a moment, how am I feeling? Do I feel like I am subsuming into this situation, into this person? Or do I feel like I'm attuning, or is there a level of attunement that's off? And if so, what could I do in this moment to bring myself back towards attunement? Just trusting whatever the first thing is that arises.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
I
Thank
feel
you.
much more grounded.
Good.
Thank you. I really love how that has you really physically drawing in to your body and taking that moment to listen. I feel like so much of when I catch myself subsuming, and often it's when I'm like at that point of burnout, it's because I've neglected my needs in those moments.
Mm,
And then I haven't held a boundary to serve myself, and I haven't even known them within myself. And without that, I haven't been able to communicate it to someone else. So that pause to just like lean in,
mhm,
remember that I'm in this body, and does my spirit need? What does my body need to take care of me? That's like a really good landing point first. And then
mm.
feeling into what is around us.
Yes. Oh, I love that you just brought this up because and I know we've touched on it a little bit in talking about subsumement, but really our tendency to subsume really does come from a place of when we're already feeling depleted. And
Hmm.
the reason being is because in those moments, we've neglected a part of ourselves. We've abandoned a part of ourselves in order to continue pushing forward or whether, whatever's causing the burnout, whether it's caretaking for somebody else, whether it's a really busy job we're upholding, whatever the reason being for the burnout. And that's information for our body too, that's information for our
Mhm.
body for how can we bring it back to this place of attunement, to this place of harmony, not just with the other, but within ourselves as well. So that's a really good nugget. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's just this constant balancing of being a part of a whole and like seeing
Mm.
this connection and oneness, but also seeing that you are your own entity simultaneously. And that
Mhm.
can be like a complicated thing to grasp and a really complicated thing to practice. And I think about it a lot with like mothers, right? Like you
Mm.
have this life you've created and you're tending to and caring for, and so much of your energy and effort is going into that and holding this like balance of like you are of me, you are from me, you are a part of me, but you're also your own thing. So in order
Mm.
to tend to you, I have to tend to me
Mhm.
too. But I think that's probably something a lot of people can relate to as they're entering motherhood or at different phases of it is this like how do we continue to care for and love on and be our fullest and give our fullest selves to these things. And I think often we think by giving, giving, giving will give us the
Mm.
best results. But I feel like what I'm hearing from you and what I've been learning throughout my life has been the more I step back and tend to myself, the better able I can tend to those things around me.
100%. Exactly. And I love that you bring up the connection here with motherhood and with mothering
Hmm.
because, oftentimes when you look at, like, subsuming and attuning side by side, you think, "Oh, attunement is good, subsuming is bad."
Hmm.
And, really, it's like it's not that polarity at all. It's just that it's more of an observation of where your energy is going and how you want to feed it back into yourself. And when it comes to mothering, like, an actual child, it's interesting from a biological perspective because subsuming by definition is absorbing something else into something else, so absorbing something into you.
Mm.
This child was literally created from you and then birthed from your body as a woman, and there's an entirely different bond, there's an entirely different, like, tendency to subsume because this thing literally was absorbed in you, so to speak. Obviously, we
Hmm.
understand it. It's its own being, but it because it was so kindred in you, like, it was so, enmeshed with you on a cellular level, that tendency to subsume is even stronger. And,
Hmm.
there's a real beauty in that, like, that's subsument is not just a negative thing, this is, essentially how children are born and then offered into the world is, like, through that, they're subsumed into you, and then they're birthed out of you, and you're learning how to attune to this new being, you know?
Yeah, I think another thing I tend to find to be more and more true is that, like, opposites are always existing simultaneously, and
Mhm.
for one to be there, the other has to too. It's not just good or
Yeah.
bad, and that there
Yeah.
are these waves, and it's
Mhm.
kind of learning how we can I almost feel like there can be a level of finding attunement even as you ride those waves, as you like, okay, maybe
Mhm.
this is a time like, okay, maybe I'm pregnant and I'm not pregnant, but in in this
Yeah, in
example,
theory.
maybe someone is, yeah, in theory.
Mhm.
And maybe it's like my body's going through this physical subsuming. How can I attune to this moment and not let
Mhm.
like how can you do both simultaneously? Or if I'm in a phase of life where I really am like
Mm.
subsumed with this goal or project I'm working on, like that's not a
Mhm.
negative thing, but can I hold a layer of attunement in this? How can I like hold
Mhm.
both in this moment?
Yeah, and it's more just like it's an observational point. So, like, it's a place where you can, like, take a step back and be like, if you're subsuming something and you're okay with that and you wanna subsume it, you're like, "I want to absorb this into me. I want it to be a part of me." That's okay. It's just more about having awareness over it, and for a lot of people, we are subconsciously subsuming all the time with so many situations, projects, relationships, etc. And we have no idea. And this is where, like, that practice of the art of learning how to attune, the art of stepping back and actually noticing what's happening on a subtle level can really, allow us to benefit, and experience the situation more, gain more insight over it. So, yeah, it's possible to be doing both at the same time. And it's not that one has to be exclusive to the other. I kind of see it more like there is a polarity between them, but it's more of like a dance between attunement and
Mhm.
subsument. And it's not like once you dial in this moment and you're like, okay, I figured out how to attune to this person and this situation. Tomorrow they're gonna be completely different and you're gonna be completely different, and it's gonna have to be a new rhythm that you're gonna have to find between the 2 of you if that's the dynamic you're working with, and
Mhm.
it yeah, there's an art to it, and you know, it's really calling us to remain curious and, remain playful rather, and
Yeah.
just continue dancing between them and noticing what your needs are in that moment. Do you actually wanna be subsuming in that situation, or do you wanna attune? And then what can you do? What, direct action can you take to move towards attunement?
Mhm. I love that, seeing it as this dance of back and forth. Aside
Mhm.
from that really wonderful pause that you shared, that sacred pause, how do you have any other helpful ways to help people as they kind of play around with this dance? And maybe if they catch themselves in a space of feeling burnt out, how can we pull back in and just ride those
Mhm.
waves?
Yeah, so, I do like to start almost all of my practices with a pause, and it doesn't have to
Mhm.
be as still and meditative, like, you could do it with your eyes open, you could be walking, you could be actively moving, but I like to invite everybody to pause, even if it's just for 10 to 30 seconds, and really tune in and ask themselves, what do they need to attune? Or what do they need to do to attune in that moment? Because each moment it's gonna be slightly different. And sometimes just the act of pausing is going to guide us into a place of natural
Mhm.
attunement, and then we're like, "Actually, I feel good." And then you can move on and, like, put it behind you and just you're good to go in that moment. But other times it's like, "Okay, I'm noticing there's a discord between me and this person I'm talking to." And, asking yourself and reflecting, what can I do rather than just diving into action and being
Mm.
like, you know, like, oh, I'm going to try this or I'm going to try that or I'm overthinking this. And I really want to make this work. So let me just try and do something really quick. And that's why I invite the pause to actually be like, okay, ground the energy and actually feel into what you need, and then take an intentional action from there if you
Mhm.
feel like an action is needed. And examples of that could vary, and I always guide people through trusting the first thing that comes up for them. So
Mhm.
oftentimes when we take a pause and we tune in with our own bodies first, what's going to come up may not logically make sense to the mind. Like, the mind wants to, like, lay it all down, it wants to rationalize, but oftentimes the first thing that pops into our mind may not be the most rational. It may be like, I need to, like, go over to that field and, like, throw rocks for a minute, or I need to, like, just, like, get up out of my chair and, like, shake it out, or I
Mhm.
need to, like, lay in child's pose, Or I need to, like, wrap my arms around myself, like, I need to feel held, and I'm not feeling seen or held by this person or this situation.
Mm.
And this is where the work that I do with somatics really comes in, because oftentimes when we need to attune to ourselves or to another situation, to an other, and practicing that, there's a physical, energetic release that needs to happen as well. There's that attunement that needs to happen in a somatic, like, through making contact and moving something in the body first. So, long story long, that's really, guiding us back. The pausing is really inviting in somatic practice in a lot of cases, but it's gonna depend, situation to situation, what you feel like you need in that moment.
What is somatic practice? It's something I know bits about, and I feel like it's growing
Yeah.
more and more of a buzzword lately. Do you mind sharing a bit about somatics and what those practices look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, somatics somatic, the word by definition means of or relating to the body. So, a lot of times you'll see just the word by itself, soma, which is just body. That's roughly defined as body. So, somatics is like, how can we relate to the body? And
Mm.
oftentimes that's through physical practice, but it's it's more subtle and intentional in form, so it's not like, doing a really active exercise would be defined as somatic, like going out and playing soccer, or, doing, like, really vigorous, not necessarily intentional movement. Somatics is more about how can we intentionally use movement to focus on our internal experience, using the physical body as a means to go inward and connect inward. So, a lot of the somatic practices, there's a couple different methodologies with it. So, this is just a really general definition of it.
Mhm.
A lot of the practices that I incorporate into my work are based off of the somatic experiencing method, which was developed by Dr. Peter Levine. And it's essentially through using these subtle body practices as a way to encourage a completion of an activated nervous system response. So when we're in
Mhm.
that activated mode where we're feeling fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, any of those four, and we need to bring it to completion, which oftentimes is when we're feeling burnt out, when we're having that tendency to
Mhm.
subsume, we want to move back into attunement, but that triggered nervous system state needs to be completed first. So practicing the somatic exercise can bring us to a place of completion, where then we can get back into that parasympathetic, that rest and digest state, to make an intentional action, whether that be to have a conversation with somebody to let them know how you need to be seen or heard if that's what's triggering you. Or, if it's in your stimulus, if it's in your environment, it's, deactivating, calming down the nervous system so that we can then move forward and be like, how can I coexist in this chaotic environment without feeling triggered or anxious or stressed out, whatever's coming up?
Mhm. Yeah, I love that way you talked about somatics, and, like, I talk about this a lot in terms of stress and burnout. It's
Mhm.
like our body's natural responses are a good thing. Like, our
Yeah.
stress isn't bad. Our body's response to stress isn't bad. It's just our body originally, like, when there was a stressor, it was fight or flight, there's freeze or
Mhm.
fawn, but you had a way to move through that energy. But
Mhm.
often today we get these, like, micro stressors or things around us that are nonstop, and we don't and we're sitting all day. We're taught to
Mhm.
control our emotions, don't do this, like, sit, work with it, don't show it. But by
Mhm.
allowing that energy to move through our body, then our hormones can recalibrate, our body can return to its equilibrium. But without that physical movement and release in some shape or form,
Mhm.
our body's holding on to it, and it's creating imbalance within us in a very profound way. So
Yes.
thank you for sharing that and shedding light into the importance of, like, you know, giving list, just like you said at the beginning, like, do the first thing that comes to your mind. It might sound really crazy, but it's probably really good for you.
Mhm. Exactly. When you feel, you heal. When you really
Yes.
let yourself feel, and a part of that feeling is letting it move through your body. All feeling, begins within the body. And we're taught in modern society to stuff it all away, to bottle it all in, and maybe only to feel it in a time, place, or situation that's socially appropriate. And yes, there's a virtue to that, because you don't want to instill more trauma or more, nervous system activation by just letting yourself have a big release in public. But if that's not the case, it's like let yourself release it as soon as you're able to, as soon as you're in a situation that feels safe for you to do so.
Mhm.
And, yeah, it's just so important to let it move through you, even if it looks silly, even if you don't
Mhm.
necessarily know what is right. You don't need to know what's right, what the right form of movement is. Your body already knows. So just kind of let it go through you, and it's gonna feel awkward at first, but the more you continue to practice those things and allow that intelligence of the body to come through, the easier it's gonna be, the more streamlined it's gonna be, and it'll just start to become second nature to move it through you rather than just holding on to it.
Mhm. And I guess that's one of the real powers of that pause that you're talking about too, because it gives us the space to attune and listen to what the body is telling
Mhm.
you and to tap into that teacher. And by calibrating your body, calibrating your internal systems, then you're better able to interact and engage with the world around you.
Yes, exactly. That's really the main reason why we pause. I mean, one, like, we all deserve a break, we all deserve to
Mhm.
take pauses. We all really need that. We Everybody lives a busy lifestyle nowadays in one way or another. And, the practice of the pause is so vital and important in that way. But at the core of it, it's a way for us to reconnect with what's going on inside. We're
Mhm.
constantly stimulated by so many other external things in our lives, conversations, social media, digital flashes and images and videos and sounds and smells, and all of these things are constantly coming at us, and we're challenged every day to either absorb them into ourselves, subsuming them, which is what we tend to do when we feel burnt out because we have less of that perceptual awareness and less of that sense of boundary, and or whether we're going to attune to them and harmonize with them. And part of that attunement is also can also be some deflection, and setting a healthy boundary and being like, I'm not going to let this come in this moment, or I don't need to let it come in. And also, I don't need to dance with it anymore. Like, my part of my attunement is recognizing, like, that I see and I feel and I sense what's happening over here, and I'm not letting it come into my field. So,
Mhm.
yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah. How do you I feel like there's a parallel here with attunement helps us tap into our own bodies and that inner wisdom and way of healing. And I'm curious too with your work with herbalism, how working with and almost, I guess, attuning with it helps us attune with the natural world when we bring in these earth elements and these plant teachers and
Mhm.
healers into our lives. Is there a parallel that speaks to you there that you want to lean into?
Yes, 100%. I mean, plants are one of my biggest inspirations in the work that I do, and especially in light, of this topic of attunement versus subsument. And we can learn so much from plants, not just from an herbal sense. by actually learning what they're good for and, medicinal purposes and preparations, etc., just from sitting with them and just from witnessing them and watching them
Mhm.
in nature, watching them, looking at the plant out your window and you noticing how it's interacting with the elements around it and what's happening there. And, noticing the texture of the leaves or like the sturdiness of the bark or the stem, or if there's like a prickly nature to it, if there's a certain intuitive color change that happens throughout the seasons. It's like noticing those things not from like an analytical, like just why is it doing what it's doing biologically, but what like how can I relate this back to my life? What is this
Mhm.
plant? What can I learn from this plant in this moment? And you don't even have to necessarily like ask yourself that so much as just allow yourself to experience it. And
Mhm.
sometimes the question can help prompt us to go deeper with it. But, plants can teach us how to create healthy boundaries in our life, or, when we need to absorb the elements into us versus having a healthy boundary, or when, we're going to learn to coexist with the ecology and the environment and the world around us. We're learning to attune, or, when naturally we're going to proliferate in certain areas over others, and there's a reason for that. So, a big part, I guess, of the knowledge I've received from plants in this topic is just through plant meditation and through sitting with
Mhm.
them and witnessing and observing and coming from a place of mindfulness and non-judgment and that observant quality, and then bringing that back into myself and, noticing that in my own pauses, what's happening in my inner world, and slowing down and practicing attunement with that plant. Plants are one of my favorite other things to attune with
Mhm.
because they prompt us to naturally slow down. And, you don't see a plant rushing to make the bus on time. It's like it's just
Mhm.
existing in its own nature. And we can also do the same. So there's a certain intelligence there that can be shared through no words at all, just, sitting and experiencing and practicing that art of attunement with the natural world, with another plant.
Definitely. I feel like it's we are from the earth. We are of the earth. We are plants to we are one with them. They're a part of us. And I think there's something we really miss out on, a part of ourselves we neglect when we see ourselves as humans are separate from nature and this
Mhm.
natural world. But when we can get curious about this connection and getting to know almost this other part of ourselves, there's I don't have the words for it. It's this like ineffable quality that we just kind of come
Mhm.
back into of for me it just feels like I feel more whole
Mm.
inside when we really delve into that. Part of me is like I just want to like run away and live in the woods and be away from all the screens and all the things, but it's also like, well, we're here in this world right now and this is what it's like right now. So if I'm not going to be like totally subsumed in nature, like if I'm not backpacking or doing these things, how can I attune to it in my day to day, in my
Mm.
natural environment? Whether that's, like you said, just kind of like sitting with the plants and
Mhm.
you could do those 10 seconds of that pause of just like take your shoes off, feel your feet on the ground, or rest your hand on a
Mhm.
plant, or just start to integrate it more and more. But I think there's something we miss when we think that we have to be either or with nature as well. I think there's an
Mhm.
attunement we can find in the way we engage in the day to day with we are in this life and this is what it looks like right now. And how can we pull in those other elements of us and the natural world as well?
Yes, I fully agree, and it's totally possible. It's I almost love practicing these things more so in an urban environment. I live in a city
Mm.
currently. I've gone through periods of my life where I've lived completely immersed in nature, deep in the mountains, and it's more of a welcome challenge for me to practice it in an urban environment. And in fact, the more you actually practice it in those situations, you start to notice how much nature really is around you. Even though there's skyscrapers or there's a lot of urban development and paved roads, etc., you start to really hone in on the beauty and the pace of nature in those little pockets where they're happening. You're magnetized to it almost the more that you start to attune to nature and really have that be your intention and your focus. And they're highlighted in a different way in those urban
Mhm.
environments. So even if you live in a small apartment in a dense city, you can step outside for 1 to 2 minutes in the middle of your workday and just watch the tree on the street in the wind and practice attuning to that. Notice that juxtaposition between the swirling city that's everything is hustle and bustle and people are moving fast and there's flashing lights and sounds and smells. And you're focused on this one natural tree just existing amidst all of it.
Mm.
And recognizing what can you learn from that? When your life feels chaotic and everything feels swirling around you and you feel bombarded by overwhelm and you're feeling burnt out, how can you how can you embody and attune to the energy like that tree is in that moment? And of course it's second nature, not to be punny, but it's second nature for the tree to do that. And there's something we can learn from plants that I feel like is often diminished as woo woo, or just like there's a whole tree hugger population that's like, learn something from trees. And it's like, yeah, there's a reason
Yeah.
they're saying these things. And yes, there's a way we can translate it to the modern human and society that feels more, what's the word? Like acceptable, I guess, that feels that's easier, more easily understood. But there's a simplicity to it. You can notice and attune these things when you're on the bus, when you're in public transit, when you're stuck in traffic in your car. And it's a limiting belief to think that we can't practice attunement with nature or connect with nature when we're busy or when we're in an urban environment. And I challenge people to use that as an impetus to actually connect, to actually learn how to practice the pause in those moments and notice, how it transforms your life and your ability to handle stress and really, to be the one that sits and attunes in the face of chaos rather than just letting it sweep you off your feet or off your center of gravity, like you were talking about.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like what you were saying with just this wisdom that nature holds just resonates with me so much of like the why this podcast is here is for me
Hmm.
it's this experience of like all these things that help us tap back into our inner wisdom. And I think nature more and more I'm like reminded of like how much there is that wisdom and that inner wisdom we get when we witness nature. It brings
Hmm.
us back to this like deep wisdom within ourselves. And just like you said, like it's so we do live in such a fast-paced society, but that doesn't mean we can't hold those other things here too. So the more we
Hmm.
can integrate this work that you're talking about of witnessing, really being with the world, the fullness of the world, not just being like fixated on like I'm doing this, this, and this today, like opening our eyes to the full scope of what's here can help us really attune to that inner wisdom within our bodies, with the natural world, and with what's happening around us.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's it's one of, like, the best benefits of this practice, It's helping us become more empathetic, more attuned humans in the world. We're able to relate to each other more easily. You can build more
Mhm.
powerful relationships with one another, really more deeply connect to what we each, our own unique gifts are in the world. And that's a really beautiful thing. And it's can be so simple to get ourselves there.
How do you like I think my inclination often is like when I really want to connect with someone, this is kind of going back to earlier in the conversation. I'm like
Mhm.
thinking I want to lean in, I want to be subsumed to really connect with you. But how can, in fact, attuning help us deepen that connection with ourselves, with the people we're around, and with that natural world?
Like, how can attuning help over instead of subsuming in those moments?
Yeah, and which how would that be more beneficial in that instance?
Yeah. So, in the moment, I always think of, like, when you're falling in love with somebody, this is always a good example. It's like
Mhm.
or you're really connecting with somebody new, and you just wanna, like, eat them up. You're like, "I don't wanna leave your
Mhm.
side, like, I'm so into you, and I just wanna dissolve into the other person," and it feels good. So you check in with yourself, and you're like, "No, this is yummy. I just wanna stay in this place of subsuming." Maybe you're, not even consciously calling it that. But then, think how you felt sometime down the road, after, maybe your relationship is starting to grow a bit and then you're starting to feel like maybe you've lost your sense of self within that because you've completely dissolved in the other. And then that's when you start to foster maybe anxious avoidant attachment patterns where you're like, I just need to like get out of this space with this person. I can't be around them anymore all of a sudden. I need space so that I can figure out who I am anymore. Or maybe you feel really anxious, like the person needs space from you. And all of a sudden you're like, well, I don't know who I am without you. Can you just stay close by to me?
Mhm.
So needless to say, it's like when we gravitate towards subsuming, especially in terms of relationship, it can be more beneficial to actually take a step back and practice attunement, especially early on when it's our tendency to subsume into something that feels good in the moment and to take a breather and be like, how am I reconnecting with myself and how am I maintaining my own access within, the beautiful polarity and the connection and the attraction and everything that's happening right now. So
Mm,
I would
yeah.
say that's one of the biggest benefits with practicing
Yeah.
attunement, especially in a relationship and especially in the early, falling in love days.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for taking the time to just lean into this conversation today and the weaving of subsuming and attuning and the many ways that it can unfold. Do you mind sharing how people can stay in touch with you and support you in your work?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me, Holly. This was such a fun conversation. And so, one of the best ways to stay in touch with me in the moment is to subscribe to my Substack. It's called the Sacred Pause Substack. And this is a place where I'm sharing more musings along these lines, talking about more topics in, the subtle layers of attunement and subsumement and, how slowing down and noticing things within ourselves, within the world around us, can then facilitate our healing. So, part of that space is sharing, some of my writing and my thoughts and my musings on these layers. And then part of it's also sharing on the herbs themselves. So, how
Mm,
can we actually use plants physically and energetically as guides to help bring us back deeper into a place of healing, into slowing down and just savoring life. So, you're welcome to, there's options for paid subscription and for free subscription. So, I'm sure Holly will link that below. I also offer an online course called The Sacred Pause. So if you're looking for a deeper dive into some of the work that we talked about here and actually receiving more intimate guidance and tools to move through and regulate a really activated nervous system. If you're struggling dealing with stress and anxiety, it's a 4-week online course that can help really implement the framework of the sacred pause, really learn and understand what's happening in the body when stress and anxiety comes up on a physical, mental, emotional, and a more spiritual relational level, and then how can we embody that? So really, I'll be
Mhm.
teaching you the actual practices, the somatic practices there. You'll be guided through different herbs every week, and there'll be a chance for sharing and relating directly with me too. So those are two of the biggest ways to stay connected. I do also share some of my work through Instagram, some more of my writing. So you're welcome to follow me there, subscribe to my email newsletter. And yeah, I think those are some of the main ways to stay connected.
And all the Heather links will be in the show notes below, but I definitely recommend subscribing to that Substack and checking out her really
Mm,
wonderful work. Thank
thank you,
you so
Holly.
much. Yeah. There's so
Oh,
much more I wanna keep talking about, but I'm
yeah,
controlling myself.
same. Oh, well, grateful for the space. Thank you for facilitating. And yeah, if you've got any questions, you, Holly, personally, or any
Mhm.
of our listeners out there, just send me an email, drop me a line, and happy to chat.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to How the Wise One Grows today. If this podcast has been impactful in your life, can you support it by following and subscribing to this podcast on your favorite streaming platform? This will make sure you never miss an episode. All you have to do is go to the show page for How the Wise One Grows and hit the plus or the follow button in the top right hand corner. While you're there, go ahead and leave a review, preferably a 5-star review, and share an episode with someone you love in your life. And if you want to support even further, you can join the How the Wise One Grows Dream Team and become a part of a group of magical people who support this podcast every month. And you'll even get a special shout out in an upcoming episode. Until the next time, let's keep taking it one breath at a time.